The Carolina Panthers announced on Monday that cornerback Jaycee Horn is designated to return off IR. What does the future hold for Horn in Carolina? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow our show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Wednesdays, like tomorrow, I answer your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions either at me or DM me to get into the weekly Wednesday mailbag on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by Jayce Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jayce case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. The Carolina Panthers prepare to welcome the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday afternoon here in Charlotte, North Carolina at Bank of America Stadium in Uptown. And the Panthers are prepared to get back possibly their top corner, as Jaycee Horn and Ian Thomas were designated to return from IR on Monday. The Carolina Panthers also signed Echo Leota, the outside linebacker, UDFA from Auburn, who's been elevated a couple times this year, was recently on Thursday Night Football. He's been signed to the active roster. Then David Sharp, who was on the active roster, the tackle, has been signed to the Carolina Panthers practice squad. But again, the most important news from Monday is that Jaycee Horn is close to returning. Frank Reich, the Carolina Panthers head coach, told us about 10 days ago that Horn is about a week, maybe 2 weeks away from coming back, and now having the mini bye. And with Dallas approaching on Sunday, it looks like Horn could make his, not his season debut, but his return since going out of the game with a hamstring injury in the second quarter of the week 1 matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. He's missed 8 games this season, and that is called into question what Jaycee Horn's future will be here in Carolina. And we all know when Jaycee Horn plays, he plays well. He is an excellent football player. And I thought going into the season that Horn had a chance to really be a breakout player. Now, I also thought the Carolina Panthers were going to be much better than they have been so far this season, but it's unfortunate that Jaycee Horn went down with an injury. And it's one of those things, too, where I feel like a lot of us are in agreement that it was a matter of if, not when, Dante Jackson and or Jaycee Horn went down with an injury. Dante's been able to play for the most part all season long. He had 1 game that he missed, and he's had a couple of injuries, but has not been out for a significant amount of time. But Jaycee Horn, on the other hand, that has been the case. And that has really just plagued him so far in his career, as you know, as I know, as we all know, as, you know, in 2021. Came out, looked amazing, especially in that week 2 blowout of the New Orleans Saints. Then you go to week 3, quick turnaround, Thursday Night Football on the turf down there in Houston, non-contact injury, goes out with a foot injury. He misses the final 14 games of that season. You only got to see him play 10 quarters, which really sucked. In 2022, he missed 2 games with a rib injury, then came back, missed the final 2 games with broken wrist after friendly fire when Jeremy Chin ran into him. Unfortunately, Jaycee Horn missing out that Week 17 matchup against Tampa Bay, where we saw CJ Henderson and Keith Taylor struggle mightily against Tom Brady and Mike Evans. I feel like the general consensus is, had Jaycee Horn played that day and knowing the Panthers went up 14-0 in that game, that the Panthers probably win. Now, the 3 turnovers that day didn't help. We know that, but Jaycee Horn would have been able to cover Mike Evans. The Panthers probably win that game. And if they would have followed it up with the win in New Orleans like they did last in that Week 18 matchup, then, of course, they are NFC Division champions. And then you wonder, is Steve Wilks, head coach here in Carolina, what does things look like right now? But unfortunately, Jaycee Horn missed those final 2 games. He missed 4 games last year. And then so far, after pulling his hamstring there in Week 1, he has missed 8 games and potentially 9 if it does not come back. But it looks like he's close. And we'll find out more on Wednesday what the actual update will be. We recently saw guys like Stephon Sullivan and Marquise Haynes both elevated, or designated return. You get the 21-day window. So Jaycee Horn has 21 days to be active activated to the active roster. And we saw quickly with Haynes, his window started, and pretty much immediately he was ready to go on Thursday Night Football. And he was needed as DJ Johnson, Marquise Haynes, and Echo Leota were the three outside linebackers having to step up, with Brian Burns out of a concussion and Justin Houston on IR. So I'll be curious to see whether Jaycee Horn is able to practice in full throughout the week, and if he's able to go out there and play on Sunday. And if he is, I would imagine that he'll be under a rep count or snap count. They're not going to probably play him the majority of the snaps, just knowing that he's coming off of an injury that's kept on for 8 weeks. And it's one of those things where you got to kind of pace the guy. But I wonder now with Jaycee Horn, he's missed 26 out of possible 43 games so far to start off his career. So he's only played in 17 games. And that is, of course, as we know, a full NFL regular season. But he has not even finished all 17 of those games. Didn't finish the game in week 1. Did not finish the game. His first injury that he had there in week 3 of the 2021 season, went out in that game against the Lions last year. So he's played in 17 games, but he has not played and finished 17 games so far in his career. So I wonder, knowing that Jaycee Horn, when he's able to play, is a good player, but the fact that he's not really ever on the field available, is there anything he can do over the final 8 games of the season to show David Tepper, Scott Fitterer, if he's still going to be here as general manager, and his coaching staff, that he is worth keeping around with the 5th-year option? I felt like as soon as he went out, that was it, curtains. I don't see how you can look at a player that's missed as much time as he has, no matter how good he is, and exercise that 5th-year option, which is going to be pretty costly. And we saw the Carolina Panthers just turn it down with CJ Henderson, now for completely different reasons. That's more performance-based than injury-based. But when you come to May and you have the option and you look at Jaycee Horn having missed that many games, I really wonder, like, can he do anything over the next 8 weeks to prove to this organization that he's worth investing in that manner? I think the answer still is no. I would love for him to come out, to play well, be a difference maker on the defense. It's good that we've seen players like DiCaprio, Bootle, even Deshaun Jameson step up, and hell, give CJ Henderson his due for the way he's played so far this season. Troy Hill, how he's come in and helped as a veteran. You have to really appreciate how the depth has kind of grown there at corner, as that was a big question mark going to the season, having seen how Henderson and Keith Taylor, who's of course no longer here in Carolina, was cut on roster cutdown day, how they performed in spot duty when Horn and when Dante Jackson have gone out with injuries. So that's a positive for the Carolina Panthers. It'd be a nice positive if Jaycee can step in, be that kind of player that we've seen from him, be a lockdown corner, and help the Panthers hopefully win a couple of games down the stretch. Maybe that'll be enough, but I just look at it, it's just too much of a risk. You really need to see him go out next season, be healthy throughout the offseason, be there for OTAs, for mandatory minicamp, be there fully for training camp, be available for the preseason, and go out and play a healthy full 17-game season. It's one of those things where it puts Carolina Panthers in a difficult situation as far as building their roster. They have some key decisions to make this offseason as far as if they could have a completely new coaching staff. It feels like that's the way it's trending, and more on that here in a moment on the show. They could have a brand new coaching staff, new general managers. We'll see what happens with all of that. So they might have to be back in a coaching search, or at the very least, a general manager search come January. And then that GM's got to decide what he wants to do with this roster. And you would also imagine that David Tepper, the owner here, as he has, is going to have some sort of say in what happens. And I think rightfully so, in a way that, hey, big decisions, you should go ahead and let the owner know this is what you want to do. I'm not necessarily saying the owner needs to sign up on everything, but he will be aware, and we know he'll be a participant in terms of whether he's going to say yes or no to a certain deal. They got to figure out what they're going to do with Brian Burns, who has all the leverage in the world for the Panthers. And as far as his trade market, not nearly what it was last year at the deadline when the Rams were trying to trade away 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick. So they got to figure out whether they're going to pay him or they're going to franchise tag him. Derek Brown is someone who they could try to get a deal done with this upcoming offseason, as he'll be on the 5th-year option next year. And the earlier you get him under contract, the better. You don't want to have that thing drag out throughout the entirety of next season and going into the offseason as well, where it looks like you probably have to use a franchise tag on him. You look at Jeremy Chin's probably on his way out the door. There's other players that you got to figure out what you want to do. Offensively, trying to find a wide receiver, plural. There's a lot of decisions to be made, and that's why it makes it even difficult for the Panthers with Jaycee Horn. It probably really isn't that difficult. The answer probably clearly is to say, hey, no, we need to see you be healthy for a full season before we even want to invest in you. But then that puts you in a situation where you're playing a franchise tag game, you maybe are going to free agency, and you potentially could lose on a player who finally shows you how talented and available he can be next season. And then you're looking at in the offseason 2025 and wondering, okay, what are we going to do there at corner? So it just complicates things for the Panthers, but it's good to hear Jaycee Horn is on his way back, potentially could be back on Sunday. And I am curious if he can do anything at all to show this organization that he's worth the fifth-year option come May. But considering how many games he's missed, it's hard to see that being a reality. Because if he does stay healthy the rest of the way, he would have missed 26 games and he would have been able to play in 25 games. So that's a tough number. All right, so we'll see what happens moving forward here for the Carolina Panthers and Jaycee Horn. But Frank Reich, he, of course, is under the microscope. The Carolina Panthers is under the microscope offensively. Dianna Russini, now with The Athletic, had an interesting report on the Panthers and trying to help Bryce Young along the way and what the future may hold for Frank Reich and the rest of this staff. We'll get into that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to the medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Jase Medical now offers customization for your Jase Case with dozens of add-on medications. Choose the medications that best fit you and your family's unique needs. Go to jasemedical.com and enter code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. We talked on the show yesterday about whether there's changes coming soon to the Carolina Panthers offense, as on Friday, following the Carolina Panthers' latest 16-13 loss to the Chicago Bears on Thursday Night Football, where the Panthers hit new lows of only 212 yards of total offense and 12 first downs, season lows on the year. We wondered, would there potentially be a change at play caller once again? Frank Reich was asked about that, and he did not let us know whether there would be a change, but everything would be under evaluation. He did say that there would be no staff changes, and he came out again on Monday afternoon and once again was asked, hey, what changes are going to be made? And he said there will be no changes to the coaching staff, but he is still evaluating the lineup and did mention that every week they're evaluating the lineup and how they can best move forward, and was once again asked whether Thomas Brown would continue to be the play caller, and he did not answer whether that would be the case, but he did say whoever's been doing the play calling, we haven't performed as an offense. Now, what the best dynamic and why will be the deciding factor on any changes that will be made. So the best dynamic and why that's the best dynamic as far as play caller and I guess quarterback and scheme, whatever, that will determine who will be the play caller and if any sort of changes are going to be made moving forward. Personally, I do not think that they should remove the play calling from Thomas Brown. Frank Reich came out and said from the very beginning that eventually Thomas Brown would take over the play calling. At 0-6, they decided to make the change, and after losing 2 games, they finally got their first one of the season, but after 2 bad performances against the Colts and against the Bears and Bryce Young regressing the last 2 weeks, I do not think that changing over play calling is the right decision and giving it back to Frank Reich. If anything, if you're going to give the play calling to someone else, maybe give it to Parks Frazier, who called plays last year in Indianapolis. I don't think that's what should happen. It should just stay with Thomas Brown. He's your offensive coordinator. He's the guy that you have said was the future play caller. He's someone you believe can be a head coach. Frank Reich was emotional when he handed over the play calling duties to Thomas Brown. Just stay there. And understand, too, as we've talked about here on the show, the offense is the offense that Frank Reich and Thomas Brown built. The plays that Frank Reich are calling is going to be very similar to the plays that we saw Thomas Brown call so far. Like, there hasn't been much change from the offense at all, other than it's been slightly worse. The main issue with the offense is they just don't have the personnel, and the scheme has not been good enough. And Bryce Young also, he's had his own failures so far this season. But what's around Bryce? The offensive line has regressed. The receiving talent has not been good enough. They have no run game. I don't see how changing the play caller is all of a sudden going to change that. Just like from the very beginning, going to Thomas Brown, I didn't think it was going to change very much because they have so many more issues aside from who's calling the plays. The offensive scheme as a whole and the personnel is the problem here in Carolina, and the offense is not going to be fixed until the offseason, whether it's Wright coming back or Thomas Brown coming back or completely different coaching staff, we're not going to see the kind of change that we don't see here in Carolina until 2024 because they need to get better players. They need to get healthier. And they need to make complete changes schematically to what they're trying to do here in Carolina. Now, Dianna Russini of The Athletic, used to be of ESPN.com, she had an interesting report that came out on Sunday about the Carolina Panthers offense and some of the changes that they might want to make. Now, there's been a lot about Bryce Young and how he's played so far this season, and it does not feel any better, I'm sure, as a Panther fan, to sit there on your off day on that Sunday and see CJ Stroud lead yet another game-winning drive in what was a really good game on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals. But Russini said that the Panthers, they're not all that concerned about Bryce Young. And also, most NFL executives and coaches around the league are emphatic that it's too early to tell and that it's unfair to judge Young after only 9 games, really 8 games that he's played in. She was told when this organization selected him out of Alabama, almost every single team employee was on board. We're talking scouts, coaches, head coach, general manager, and the owner, of course, all believe Young was a guy based on the research, data, and in-person meetings. And that certainly jives everything that we have heard. I've said multiple times, I do not think that the Carolina Panthers, who moved up to number 1 with the blessing of David Tepper, who really wanted that to happen, that they were going to draft a quarterback that David Tepper did not want. They were going to get the guy that David Tepper wanted. But that did not mean that Scott Fitterer, that Frank Reich, that Thomas Brown, that the entire coaching staff and front office did not all also want Bryce Young. I just believe that Tepper was going to get his guy, and everyone, of course, is on board with that, which makes things better. And the whole alignment thing, that's a positive. The opinion that Young is the future is still the unified belief based on conversation with multiple team sources. That's excellent news for Panther fans. Everyone remains in lockstep, and I agree with Russini. That is a good thing, that people in that building are not giving up on Bryce Young after 8 games. If they were, then, well, the Carolina Panthers have bigger issues considering who made the decision to get Bryce Young, which is basically everyone within that organization. But she did say, however, I am told Panthers owner David Tepper is frustrated by this offense and its lack of improvement. Some of the building believe the roster hasn't been built correctly, which others criticize the offense overall. This is an offense some league sources have described as boring, predictable, and even lifeless. Those are all apt description, as this has been difficult to watch all season long. I mean, sitting there on Thursday night, just trying to stay awake because of how bad the offense is. And I was talking to a friend about what's worse, having a bad offense or a bad defense. Because on Sundays with the Panthers, I watch a bad offense. On Saturdays with the Tar Heels, I watch a horrible defense. And I believe, and we came to general consensus that, yeah, having a bad offense is so much worse because you never get any sort of fireworks. There's not much of a belief that you can win. Your defense isn't going out there and scoring a ton of points for you anyways. So you need the offense to go out there and at least be able to be in a shootout, even if your defense can't stop anybody. So the bad offense has been horrible to watch here in Carolina. It's not just this year. It's last year. It's the year before that. It's just been a consistent theme for the Carolina Panthers since Cam Newton's body fell apart and they got rid of him. Dianna Russini said that she's told the message to the building right now is ownership needs to see more progress on offense. There needs to be development and improvement. And if the second half of the regular season looks like the first half, she expects Carolina to make changes. I have learned those in power want to start seeing an offense that looks like what Young executed in precision at the University of Alabama, which included bubbles, RPOs, and that leans into his strengths. Ownership is satisfied with the defense and the special teams. And there was more later on in that. And the questions that Frank was asked on Monday were a lot about, hey, why does Bryce not go under center very much? And Frank talked about, well, Bryce is really good in the gun, that they've run some pistol, which we did not see in the preseason, but we saw really a lot in that opening drive of the season down in Atlanta. And I don't feel like we've seen that much pistol since then. Saw a little bit of it on Thursday night against Chicago. But it'll be interesting to see, because if they're talking about they're going to try and use some more RPOs and do more what they did at Alabama, then you're really not going to see Bryce Young in the shotgun that much. But really the message that she said that was told to her, as far as ownership needs to see more progress on offense, there needs to be more development and improvement. That jibes with my belief that Bryce Young development is really all that matters the rest of the way. And that's really been my belief from the very beginning, that this season, yes, wins, losses, that's important. You want to win. You were very close to being a playoff team last year. Maybe a little bit of it was fool's gold, considering what this team looks like now. Now, I think that a lot of the offensive personnel decisions It goes back to the roster not being built correctly, and that's David Tepper's frustration. That's on the coaching staff. That's on Scott Fitter, that they made some poor evaluations in the offseason with who they decided to bring in and also who they decided to let go. And now the offense that they built has not been good at all, and that has not helped Bryce Young and his development. But that message that's being placed out there, that if Bryce continues to regress, that Bryce continues to have his struggles, that's going to cost at least Scott Fitter his job as far as roster construction goes. But I would also assume that it would cost Frank Reich, Thomas Brown, and his entire coaching staff their job. If Frank Reich keeps his job, then Thomas Brown will be the scapegoat. They'll go out there and they'll find another coordinator, and that coordinator will be running his offense. I don't think David Tepper is going to allow Frank Reich to really be that involved and it be a marriage between his offense and the coordinator's offense. It would be the coordinator's offense coming in. That's what I would see. I could see Fitter being gone first, and if Frank Reich survives, then it's a change at OC. Whoever they bring in is going to come in and run their offense. So that message right there about development and improvement, that's all about Bryce Young. And if they don't look like the right coaching staff for Bryce Young in the future, which so far they have not looked like it at present moment, that is a problem. And that will lead to them no longer being here in Carolina. So we'll see how that works out. Now, there's some interesting reporting that I saw that I was a little bit late to that came out Thursday about the Panthers being active at the trade deadline for 2 receivers, which goes back to a lot of reporting that we had read. We'll talk about those 2 guys and another player the Carolina Panthers try to pursue at the deadline here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And there's a great time now to join FanDuel as you got college basketball, got the Champions Classic going on tonight. You also, of course, have college football winding down as we get closer to the college football playoff, the NHL, the NBA, you got the in-season tournament if you're all about that. So many things going on in sports as we're here in the crossover season. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, as I just mentioned, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. When the Carolina Panthers stood pat at the deadline, I didn't really find it all that surprising considering some guys that they would have liked to potentially move off from. Shaq Thompson and Jeremy Chin were both on IR. Jeremy Chin, who appears to be on his way out from Carolina, he would have made a lot of sense for a player the Carolina Panthers could have gotten some decent return for that could help them with their draft capital. And I agree that, yes, Carolina Panthers right now, they're in a weird spot where it's likely that if things continue the way they are going, that the Carolina Panthers will have a brand new coaching staff and probably a brand new general manager. At the very least, I would expect them to have a brand new GM once they get into the draft in April. So there's going to be some changes there. There could be even bigger changes here as far as, both the coach, the general manager, and then you could see some players that are here right now, like Brian Burns, even Derek Brown, be jettisoned off elsewhere. So the Carolina Panthers could get more draft picks and help to build around Bryce Young and really get this organization on the right track. And there's an argument to be made that that's probably the right decision for the Carolina Panthers. As you look at it, what the Panthers need is draft picks. What they need are younger players on cost-controlled contracts that can come in, that can start for them. And so many of the draft misses are a big reason why the Panthers are in the position that they're in right now. And also some of the trades that they made that have limited the amount of draft compensation Carolina Panthers have had over the last couple of seasons also plays a role in where the Carolina Panthers are right now. So I wasn't all that upset that they weren't able to make a move because I wanted to see a guy like Brian Burns stick here in Carolina. Also knew that the return was not going to be nearly what it was last year, and that's very difficult to be able to find a player of Burns' caliber there at edge rusher, just as it's difficult to find, franchise quarterback. It's difficult to find that kind of wide receiver like they had with DJ Moore, to find a player like Christian McCaffrey. The Panthers eventually have to retain some of their star players as opposed to getting rid of all of them because of all the other mistakes that they've made. But we'll see what it looks like moving forward. Now, the Panthers reportedly were in the market to find a #1 wide receiver at the trade deadline. I was skeptical of how the hell they were going to make that happen. But according to David Newton of ESPN.com, they were interested in 2 guys that I think have been on our radars. I know one of them for sure. The other one I think has been mentioned a couple times by y'all in the mailbags and other messages y'all have sent to me. But Dave Newton said that the Panthers went after Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins and Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams before the trade deadline, according to the NFL front office source that he has. But neither team was willing to make a deal. Higgins thing seems pretty obvious. The Bengals are going to at least tag him come this offseason. They're also a team that's trying to make the playoffs. They're trying to win a Super Bowl. They were red hot until they lost on Sunday against Houston. They're still a good football team in a very competitive division in the AFC North. It kills their team. It doesn't kill their team, but it really hurts them to lose a player like T. Higgins in the middle of the season, especially give him to a team like the Panthers that were going nowhere. So I get that. Davante Adams, I feel like that would have been something that would have been more likely to happen. Like the Jets apparently were also interested in Davante Adams. They have bigger issues than that. The Jets do. It's that quarterback. Just offensively as a whole, just not very good. The Jets aren't. Same case with the Panthers. But Adams would have made a little bit more sense because Josh McDaniels is still there. Dave Ziegler is still the general manager. Maybe they would have been more interested. But as we know, that did not come to fruition. So you see that they're interested. It's just highlights just how this team had such lack of foresight on what was to come when they got rid of DJ Moore, going into a very poor wide receiver free agent market and looking at the draft class where they were going to sit at, that they just did not put themselves in position to be able to build the wide receiver core. The guys that they brought in, they thought were going to be better than they have been. Adam Thielen, he has absolutely been what they expected. DJ Chark has been a massive disappointment for the Carolina Panthers. Jonathan Mingo, still way too young. I don't know what role Damiere Byrd would have played here in Carolina, but he has not been great. And we have not seen Terrace Marshall step up from last year and continue the play that he had in the final 12 weeks of the season. Laviska Shenault has been seldomly used. He's looked good at times, but right now he's been dealing with an ankle. Just the overall receiving core. And then looking at Hayden Hurst as well, that has not helped out the Panthers so far this season. So that led to them to knock on the door of T. Higgins and Davante Adams. And for right now, that has not happened. Now, I would say after the offseason, well, let me get to this, though. If Antonio Pierce, who's won 2 straight games as the interim there in Las Vegas, if the Raiders stay competitive and he gets that job, don't see Davante Adams leaving. He's not going to let Davante Adams leave. Davante Adams looks happy. That man looked depressed when Josh McDaniels was there. He was broken. And as soon as McDaniels was gone, Max Crosby's lighting up stogies. Davante Adams is smiling ear to ear. Like, that guy ain't going anywhere if Antonio Pierce is the head coach in Las Vegas. And if he's not, good chance he probably stays with the Raiders unless he decides, hey, I got to get out of here. T. Higgins, that's the one I'm looking at. That's going to cost Panthers draft compensation. He's not going to leave Cincinnati for free. And that is a big issue for the Panthers, that they're going to have to give up more assets to be able to go get T. Higgins. Now, the hope is you only give up a second-round pick, and that's still not ideal, but that's what it would take at the very least to be able to sign T. Higgins. Then you have to think about the contract figures, which goes back to the Jaycee Horn thing about how complicated, not knowing what to do with JC as far as what his future is going to be in Carolina, because you have Derek Brown, you got Brian Burns, you got guys like Frankie Louvu. You need to get more receivers, probably some help on the offensive line, tight end, running back, all of that figured out. And T. Higgins is not going to come cheap. So we'll see. But that's still the guy I'm looking at come the offseason. One other thing that I found interesting in David Newton's reporting, the Panthers apparently also made a run at Washington Commanders edge rusher Montez Sweat to pair it with Brian Burns. Of course, he ended up in Chicago, and that just doesn't make any sense at all to me. When the Bears traded a second-round pick for Sweat, they had no choice. Like last year with the Dolphins trading for Bradley Chubb, they had no choice. They had to sign him to an extension, and they did that immediately. The Carolina Panthers have failed to sign Brian Burns, but they're going to trade for Montez Sweat, who needs a big deal. Like, they both need to get paid. So you're not going to, would that have been your backup plan? Maybe Montez Sweat will be more reasonable in what he wants than Brian Burns. I forget what the contract figures were. I just found that to be very interesting that they don't want to pay Burns, but then they want to trade for Montez Sweat, who has to get paid. That is the problem. That they just seem to be so directionless, have no sort of plan on what they want to do with roster building. And that goes back to the owner's frustrations and why Scott Fitter is likely going to be out the door. They don't want to pay Brian Burns, but they want to trade for Montez Sweat to pair with him, even though they would have to pay both those guys. And the last time they had a chance to keep 2 premier edge rushers on the roster, they let Hassan Reddick go because they were pursuing Deshaun Watson, who never wanted to play in Carolina. And that is part of the problem with what we have with this organization and their lack of a vision and their lack of an ability to be able to execute a plan properly and produce a winner here in Carolina. And that's what's going to cost a lot of people their jobs here in a few weeks' time. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network with your host, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, at Julian Council, where tomorrow I'll be back again to answer your weekly Wednesday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.